Okay. Hi everyone, and welcome to our first virtual practice reflection workshop. We're all very new to this new way of working, so please bear with us today. My name's Kellyanne Perry and I work for the Safeguarding Partnership Board, and I'm the interim practice improvement lead there. Because we are on a live event, we can't see you or hear you. But we do have a question and answer function. So if you want to, whilst we're going along, post any questions in there, please do. And if we can't answer them throughout the session today, we will devise a question and answer briefing and post it to everybody at the end of the day. You can also say hi. We'd like to know who we've got with us today. So just say hi and where you're from. So some of you may have joined our face-to-face practice reflection workshops previously. We've been running these now since September 2019, and each month we do have a different theme across both adults and children's. We advertise these for all practitioners who are across the partnership, and we encourage both adults and children's practitioners to attend any of these sessions, as we're trying to have a really big focus on kind of think family, a whole family approach. And obviously if you work with adults, you may have contact with children, and if you work with children, then you're definitely going to have contact with adults. And it's about kind of making sure that people have a greater understanding of each other's worlds and what support is available. And we do feel as well that all of the skills that you learn are, very transferable as well. So we've chosen to do this practice reflection workshop on domestic abuse in light of Covid-19, as we're all having to learn different and new ways of working, and we're having to learn those very quickly as well. And domestic abuse and engaging with families, we're having to do that, and it does have its challenges, and it's about how we can do that differently. So what we want to do here today is to do some reflection around how we can work differently and how we are working differently across Walsall. So this webinar will hopefully bring opportunity to reflect on a family who's currently in need of support around domestic abuse, and how the professionals involved have had to change their practice to continue to support them. So we'll be exploring the solutions and the resources currently available, and that can ensure that we are providing the best possible support for that family now and when we go back to some sort of normality after lockdown. So this isn't right help, right time training, and it isn't domestic abuse training. It is reflecting on a current family. So we do have some other training that's available around right help, right time and domestic abuse. And at the end of the session, I'll come back and I'll just navigate you as to where you can find that e-learning on the Safeguarding Partnership website. So we're joined today by Isabel van der Heeren, who is the transformation lead for Walsall, and she's going to be leading the session today. We've also got Kerry Lister on board, who is our admin support, who's going to be kind of moving the slides for us because we don't get control of that. So obviously you'll hear us asking Kerry to move on to the next slide. And we're also joined by Cheryl Hickling and Sharissa Edwards, who are family support for early help from the West locality team. So I'm going to pass you over now to Isabel, who's going to introduce us to the session, and then Cheryl and Sharissa will come in later to reflect on the case. But like I say, any questions, queries along the way, please write them in the comments box and we will try and answer them as we go. Thank you.
So welcome everyone. So as Kellyanne said, I'm Isabel van der Heeren. I'm the lead for transformation, and I have run a couple of these reflection workshops, but not online as yet. So they will run a little bit different. Although normally what we try to do with the reflection workshop, it's not training as such. So the right help, right time training, which Kellyanne will talk about at the end, is available for everyone, and that takes you through the guidance and reflects on each level of the guidance and kind of gets you to reflect on different case studies. What today is meant to do is kind of start reflecting on practice and embedding that guidance and what that might mean for different subjects. So today we will try to have a conversation and you can interact with that conversation. So if there's anything I say or Sharisa or Cheryl when they introduce the family say that you want to reflect on or you have further questions on, then please publish them into your questions and answers and we'll pick them up because that will help you to reflect on the guidance and making sure that we have that right discussion going forward. So next slide, Kerry. Okay, so before we start, so in terms of implementing the right help, right time guidance, we kind of really important to reflect on why we're doing this. And the Children Commissioner last year brought a really good report out of some research that they've done about the impact of not providing the right help, right guidance. And you probably can't see the detail of that slide much, but it is worth going to that publication and reading on it and putting that into the light of our threshold guidance, because what this gives is an overview of when children and families aren't given the right help, right time, how issues can escalate and how that then lead to the cycle of vulnerability and the cycle of complex adults and complex families continuing. So this slide, which you'll find in the report, reflects on Ben at age 2, where the family was at that emerging level 2, level 3 early help with some mental health issues around homelessness, and actually Ben's progress in terms of 2-year-olds starting to be impacted by it, and the very simple things of providing some counselling for adults and getting Ben into a 2-year-old provision could have prevented some of those issues escalating, but that help and support wasn't provided. And so the issues for Ben became worse at age 5, still not providing the right help, right time, then escalated in Ben age 12, becoming a complex adolescent, and then the issues repeating as he became an adult. So it's a really good document to go into and have a reflection on. We will send out the PowerPoint and the slides afterwards, so you will have the link to that following today's webinar. Okay, so next slide, Kerry. So in terms of when we send the email out, we ask people, some of you will have gone onto the training, other people hopefully will have followed the link of the threshold guidance and will have had a read through it. So the window of threshold level 1 to level 4, and I'm not going to go through that, but I wanted to reiterate some key elements that we need to think about today, and kind of in any family we're supporting, whether it's around domestic abuse or around another issue, is that we can't make good decisions on what level of support is needed for that for a family or a child without having conversations with colleagues around us, other professionals in our own team, but also conversations with the family. And we've got to reflect that, you know, a lot of us will be working from home or have limited time together with team members or with other professionals in a room together. So we've got to think about how we can still make that happen and how important conversations still are in light of the current circumstances. So for children, still having conversations between school and the locality family support teams, or schools and health professionals, schools and social workers, is really important to know whether children are safe, whether they are provided with the right help and support, and kind of make decisions on what level of help do we need to provide. It also continues to be supporting, and we'll talk about that today, about working with the family. It makes it really hard at this moment in time to have that face-to-face contact, regular contact, to do the interventions. But how can we have regular contact and see the families given the social distancing. So we will be reflecting on that with Cheryl and Teresa today. And in terms of our thresholds, although there will be some adult workers that have joined us, we will be reflecting on some of the issues may be adult issues, but in order to assess the level of support, we will be thinking about the impact on the child and how significant is the impact of the child, and therefore what support do we need to provide. We all have a responsibility to identify and take action, and that's very clear in our guidance, but also in the national guidance set, and that doesn't change with COVID-19 and the social distancing. So we all still have the responsibility to identify and take action. The threshold doesn't change, although there are some challenges around how do we assess what is the right help at the right time at this moment in time, especially when it comes to domestic abuse. So we may want to reflect in a different way, but we're still kind of considering in terms of the threshold, what is the impact, and the level 4 in terms of social workers get involved would only be where there are significant issues around child protection. The child needs to be protected and there is significant harm, but of potential of significant harm, where we make a referral to the MASH. Okay. So in terms of thinking about then what makes a difference, so again I wanted to share this, and I shared this at the other reflection workshops, is a piece of research that was done by Harvard University some time ago now, but still very relevant, is that they did some research about what makes a difference to children, and you can see there that even in circumstances of you know, from hardship, of poverty, challenges around substance use or serious mental illness, even the stresses of war, etc. What they came to the conclusion with, and what that piece of research said, was that the single most common finding was that children who end up doing well have at least one stable and committed relationship with a supported parent, caregiver, or adult. So we need to think about that. Whatever interventions we do, how can we connect children and families back into a community and provide them with that stable network? And I always reflect on myself, and where, you know, where do we as professionals have our network of support? As we grew up, we had, you know, our parents, we often had neighbours, auntie, uncles, friends that we called auntie and uncles, and that's our network of support. And we should have an ambition that all children in Walsall have a network of support that will help and support them growing up. And where children are isolated or families are isolated, then you know, kind of that network of support and that vulnerability becomes greater. So we need to think about that. And again, in social distancing, in light of domestic abuse, that provides us with some challenges, but what we need to think about is we will be coming out of lockdown. Social distancing will be eased, you know, social distancing will continue, but actually the lockdown restrictions will be eased. So how can we start planning to connect families with the resources out there to make sustainable change? And when we think about threshold, next slide, Kerry. When we think about threshold, often people think either is it early help or is it social work attendant, you know, who's the lead professional and therefore who's responsible. But this is something we use in the reflection, is that it's not one or the other, that the two often will need to work together. So alongside, if it is a social worker involvement, there will be the need for early help services and preventative services, targeted services, to continue to be involved and support. And it's about that network of support for families and children that will give us sustainable change. And that's really important when we think about that package of support. How do we make the community resource exist alongside a lead professional resource, whether that's a teacher, an early help worker, worker or a social worker. So really important to think about that. Okay. So when we then think about domestic abuse, there is some clear definitions from the Home Office what domestic abuse consists of. So any incident or pattern of incident of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence and abuse between those aged 16 or over. And that's really important that, you know, in terms of age of 16, we often talk about young people becoming violent against adults, but that's not classed as domestic abuse. So it's about 16 and over. So it's an adult issue. But what we're considering in terms of the threshold is how are children impacted by it, and therefore what change does need to happen. So it's about the parenting and how the parenting is impacted by the issue around domestic abuse. But what we also need to think of, although you know, it's the adults' need, is how can we work with the adults, because nobody should be living in violence. What makes them vulnerable in terms of the domestic abuse, and how can we resolve the needs, and how are they impacted by it, and how can we move on to healthy relationships, both in terms of the victim of domestic abuse but also the perpetrator. And it's really important to start thinking about both the aspects around that. And we talked about that for people. Again, when we send the website out, we put the link in there of the webinar we did a couple of weeks ago on the 24th of April, I think it was, and for people to go in there and kind of listen to that, and some advice that was given by the police, Black Country Women's Aid and Early Help, specifically going into domestic abuse in the light of COVID-19. And how we can provide that help and support with the lockdown and the social restrictions. So there is some training around domestic abuse if people wanted to do some more detailed training, which will go into the detail of the types of domestic abuse. So it's not just about violence, but it's also about coercive control and behaviour, about that emotional abuse. And Sarah in the webinar, can I have the next couple of slides, Kerry? Sarah Ward, the Chief Executive from Walsall Women's Aid, from Black Country Women's Aid, talked about in the webinar that we did on the 24th, that you can go and listen to, about the impact of COVID-19 and the isolation onto domestic abuse, and why it made victims more vulnerable around that. So she talked about, you know, kind of the principle around isolation, feeling anxiety, being disconnected from the community, makes it an environment that makes them more vulnerable, and actually an ideal environment for a perpetrator around the issues around domestic abuse. And we'll reflect on that today with the family that we will be talking to. I won't go into details because you can go to the webinar, and Sarah from Black Country Women's Aid talks around that much more detail, so it's worth go and have a look if you weren't part of that webinar. She also talks about the questions that we keep that we can start asking even though we're in lockdown, about how can we have conversations with victims about whether they're safe, whether they needing help and support, and how to start that conversation. And again, in the webinar, Sarah from Black Country Women's Aid gives some helpful tips and advice about how to have those conversations and what help and support is out there. So again, it's really worth having a listen to if you weren't part of that webinar, and Kellyanne will talk about the link at the end of this session. So without further ado then, let's kind of introduce our family, just to make clear that although it's a real family that we work with in Walsall, all the names and the characters are, you know, we kind of made them anonymized, so it's not their real names, and so nobody can identify them. But we will be asking questions around the family to make it as kind of reflective as possible, and have a discussion with the panel members. So if you've got any questions or any reflections as we go through the needs of the family and reflecting on where it fits with the threshold, then feel free to do that in the questions and answers. So I'm going to ask Kellyanne as well, because I'm kind of trying to facilitate and look at the questions and answers. If there's anything come up, feel free, Kellyanne, to come in and ask those questions of either Cheryl and Sharissa.
Will do. Yeah, will do.
Brilliant. So Cheryl, do you want to introduce yourself and Sharissa, and you know, say who you are and how, you know, what your role is in terms of the family at the moment?
Hello everybody, my name's Cheryl Hicklin and I'm a senior practitioner with Early Help. I have worked with Danny and the family for a couple of years previously, over the couple of years. Danny, we're working with Danny at the moment under Early Help Level 3. We've done an Early Help assessment. There's also Sharissa. Sharissa would like to say hi.
Hi everybody.
Sharissa is also co-working the family with myself. Danny is 10 years old and is in year 6 at the present time in a primary school, and he's actually on a reduced timetable. He is due to attend senior school this September. There's mom in the family. She's a stay-at-home mom. She looks after the younger sibling. The younger sibling is 4 years old. She attends nursery part-time at present. Dad did leave the family home last year and went off to live in London. He did return in September 2019 and he did move into his own flat. But then he has recently started to visit the family home more often, and due to Covid-19, he has been actually self-isolating altogether in the family home with Danny, his sibling and mother. And what triggered the need for this help was Danny was displaying quite challenging behaviour and bullying and aggressive in school, in primary school. He in the playground, he would be, especially with younger children, he would bully younger children, he'd be lashing out. And school did give him some fixed terms exclusions. And eventually it did escalate a lot more, and he was actually permanently excluded after he lashed out at a teacher in the school. So this meant that he was a child no longer in education. It took a long time for us to try and find him at another school, because there was a lot of schools that he could go to out the area, and it was very difficult for mum to get him there. And we came up to a few barriers, but we eventually got him into a school which wasn't as close to the home as his other school had been. But he started going there, and his behaviour before we got him into school really escalated. It really escalated, lashing out at mom. Then it became lashing out at mom, and also because dad had left, it seemed to escalate even more. And mom was at her wit's end at one point, and it did become a little bit of a challenge to care. And okay. So we put so what happened was school had put a mark in, and they'd identified about us doing an early help assessment. So that's when we did undertake that. We identified the needs as routines in the home, trying to keep Danny active and healthy. We got him into some the programme of Children Missing from Education programme, and all the time trying to get him back into school. We eventually did identify a school for Danny, and he did start there, and he's on, as I said, a reduced timetable. We have been working with relationship building for Danny with his mom. We have been working with Turning Point as well as co-working it as well, because it's so important to work with other agencies and school. And we've been having lots of meetings, and we've identified through the early help assessment and through the meetings We've given mum parenting. We're giving mum parenting support, which obviously at the time now we can still do that online, and it also you can do it with live. So we've been doing that with mum. A lot of talking to Danny through the WhatsApp videoing. Black Country Women's Aid, we're also working with mother, but obviously because of the lockdown that had become more difficult, and now that dad has moved back into the family home, so we continue, and at the moment Sharissa is keeping quite a lot of conversations going with Danny, and she speaks to the family. I think it's twice a week, Sharissa.
Yeah, we'll get to. Well, Cheryl, can we keep to when the need was identified? And Teresa, I'll bring you in a little while about, you know, how you engaging with the family now, and maybe what you're thinking about kind of in the future. So Cheryl, I just want to explore with you. So the trigger for help was behavior, and I think that's fair to say when we're looking at domestic abuse, actually the impact on the children, especially at Danny's age, what we are seeing is that the behavior in children changes and can cause us challenges. So that's often what the referral will say, and this was the case with Danny. The referral was for behavior. How did that behavior conversation, how did you as a family support worker together with the school and other professionals start thinking about linking that behavior to some of the root causes, and how did you have some of those conversations with the parents, which acknowledge is probably a difficult one?
I mean, there had been prior referrals, and there had been domestic. We had some prior historic school had said, you know, that they felt that there was something not quite right. Dad had been very aggressive in the school. They'd had to stop him coming into the school. And by talking to other professionals, this became that we could see, yeah, we think there is something going on. But mum is very defensive, and will say no, no, no. So it's really working with mum and forming that relationship, and also all the professionals, you know, just all aware of what could be in the background.
Yeah. So are you able to give a little bit of detail about how did you get mum to the point that she was accepting help from Black Country Women's Aid? I know you've said disengaged a little bit now, but how previously she had. Can you kind of explain a little bit that, you know, how you did that, and kind of what was key in terms of the principles of your practice around that?
Yeah, I mean, we, you know, as practitioners, we understand it's very hard for, you know, it was very hard for mother to come forward and say, yes, this is happening. And what we did was we did a lot of work. We did some, we did about understanding your child, and we did a little bit of work, which kind of from the mellow parenting myself that we did about talking about, you know, we were trying to get to root causes. Why do you think he's doing this behaviour, Mum? Where do you think, you know, where do you think, and kind of getting her to think about it, and for her to see, we talked about, you know, when we talked about kind of things of the effects that DV can have on children's behaviour. Yeah. And I think by listening to that, and she also was part of a parenting, and I think she was listening to some other parents that were talking about their situation, and I think just one day she kind of just, you know, said, yeah, I think this is why Danny's behaving like he is. And I think it was kind of listening to other people, and, you know, just that slowly, you know, talking to her, and, you know, she came to that decision herself, really.
So really, you just reiterate the importance of building a relationship and trust, going back to that. And secondly, hearing it, the network of hearing from other parents. So just Cheryl just mentioned understanding your child and mellow parenting programs. So in Walsall, just for people that are in listening in, we have got a suite of parenting programs. Understanding your child in particularly is based on trauma-informed practice. So it will explore some of the trauma that parents themselves may have experienced, as well as the trauma that children may experience, and how to understand your children's development and how to respond to that. That's right, isn't it, Cheryl? So that can give you a link in, and we developed that both as group work programs and as online programs. So that's still available for people, and we'll put the website on that. I've just picking up on a couple of questions, Cheryl, before we move on to Sharisa and how she's picked up that help and support. So one of the questions is, okay, if it's a question around children on reduced timetable and being excluded, and that's a really important thing to pick up. So the school, in terms of what they saw was behaviour, and obviously as a school you would have to consider the safety of other children, the consequences of that behaviour, but actually there is this other side of that question about, by excluding Danny, and kind of you know, what did that do in terms of his behaviour and being back in a household that wasn't you know, kind of positive, or kind of helped him to mitigate against that, and what work did you do with the school to kind of reintegrate Danny back into and stop the risk of exclusion?
Yeah, well, Danny's behaviour did really escalate when he wasn't in school. So, you know, as soon as we did find a school, we identified the school, we had transition meetings where, you know, we took Danny into the school, he came into the meetings, talked about what we were doing, and we slowly introduced him into school, the timetable slowly, like, you know, half day, a couple of hours, half days, and also trying to, because going out on the playground was quite difficult, because, as you said, he would put other children at risk with his behaviour. So it was about trying to just, you know, slowly get him into just going, having his lunch and then leaving. So these are the kinds of things we worked around. And obviously now we have the big one of he's now transferring from primary to senior school. So we are doing a lot of work around that as well. But it's a lot of meeting other professionals, really. And, you know, having a young person there as well, I think, was so important, that he, you know, he was part of that plan of how we were going to reintroduce him back into school.
Okay. And then there's another question on the dad's involvement in the assessment and the solution. So how have you engaged with Dad, and how has he been involved in kind of the plan?
Dad has been quite hard to engage, really, because he does work and he doesn't really want to come into school. We have been on, we have tried to speak to him by telephone and include him into it. And Mom does a lot of, like, you know, we'll say to Mom, will you pass this on? And we'll talk to Danny, and we'll do a lot with Danny about, you know, what would you like to do with Dad? Is there something, you know, some particular thing you would like to do, which is always about his gaming and wants to play in his games. So we've tried to include Dad by there and by telephone calls, because he doesn't want to come to meetings. But we do ask Mom to pass on, you know, the paperwork, and talk about what we've, you know, talk to him about what we've been talking about, and if there are any actions that he wants to be on the plan.
So in terms of Danny and Mum's network of support, then, so when you got involved, remind me, was Dad still living at the property?
He was just, when we got involved, he was just leaving the property. He just, I think he left within perhaps a couple of weeks, really. Yeah.
Okay. And that's often then, in terms of professionals and looking at the thresholds again, and looking at the threshold guidance, what often will happen is, when perpetrators move out, people feel that the risk reduces, but actually that's a really good opportunity to start working with both parents and children to look at, you know, how they move on from that, and how get the help and support around the healthy relationships for the parents, but then the children about processing what's happening. So were you able, did that provide you an opportunity to do much more targeted interventions with Mum and with Danny and Dad?
Yes, yeah, because Mum attended there's a health relationships program. She did attend there, although she did feel, still was saying, this isn't what's happening to me. But she did, and we know that she did take parts of it, because, as I've said, she was listening to people about the effects of the behaviour. And I think as she saw the behaviour escalating with Danny, I think that's when she said, you know, that's what made her think, yeah, this is what's happening. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, there is a good reflection here on actually from what you said, and I think it's a common theme that the perpetrator is quite difficult to engage, and actually sometimes could be seen as undermining the process. But I think what's really important to think about is that they are a significant parent, and also you know, the perpetrator is a really important part of thinking about the solution, because the perpetrator may, even if they completely disengage with that family, they may start a relationship with another family, and that relationship will also be unhealthy. I think, you know, the work that we do to build a relationship with the perpetrator and understand where their behavior is coming from, and then understanding what the right intervention is for them, is as important, and helping and understanding the victim as well. So it's about engaging with the perpetrator as a dad, and kind of having some brave and honest conversations about how his behavior in this case is impacting on his children, and why he is a risk to the children and impacting on their growth and development, really. And having some honest conversations with dad is really important about that, because you were saying Danny still, you know, wants to engage with dad and seeing him as a significant other, but then he will have also seen the other side of dad, of how he is with mum. So it's really important that we continue to engage, that we have those brave conversations and reflect on their impact as adults onto the children. Go on, Cheryl.
I was going to say, this is what we're hoping now, because obviously he spent a lot more time at the home, and we are hoping now, because we're going to try and see if, you know, we can get him involved in his school transition as well, and be part of that now. So hopefully, you know, those relationships now with Danny have grown with his dad, and so, you know, we can get him being part of that transition to his new school.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the relationships, yeah.
So did you feel, so you got involved when Danny was about 10, there's also a younger sister, and kind of, have you considered the impact on the 3-year-old, and kind of what's part of the plan for her?
Yeah, we talked to school. We talked to the little one when we're on home visits, and Danny is quite protective about his sister, because we have had these conversations with Danny. I know I have, and I know Sharisa has, and I know that previous agency Turning Point did, about, you know, his effects of his behaviour on his sister. You know, your sister's seeing you angry, she's seeing you, you know, slam doors, she's seeing how you speak to mom, and you can see that he does really, you know, you can see that he's really thinking about that. So we just do keep in contact with school, really, and mom, and, you know, at the moment that's how we have been working with it.
Yeah, and again, putting it through the threshold. You know, being in a domestic abuse relationship is complex. There's lots of issues to unpick from an adult side, as well as the impact on children. And you know, victims don't find it easy to leave a relationship. You know, it's not easy, because the perpetrators, the dads to their children, etc. And it's about that support and how we continue that. And there are very much signs that mum recognizes that change that needs to happen, but now and again she falls back on that old relationship. So especially when things are vulnerable in terms of lockdown and isolation, kind of dad having a conversation about, you know, why do I need to move in, and her not being at the point of saying, you know, no, you can still live apart. So unpicking that with both adults and then reflecting on the impact that might have on the children will be really important now and coming out of lockdown, especially Dan's transition. So just want to move on to Sharisa. So you have just taken over support for the family, haven't you, Sharisa?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you're brand new to Danny and mom and dad. So tell us a little bit about how have you managed that, considering we are not able to provide the face-to-face interventions that we would normally do.
So at first, just before the lockdown, I met mum once. So she knew who I was. And obviously I knew who she was. And then since the lockdown, I've just been giving her regular calls at the beginning of the lockdown, just to show her that I'm offering her some support and taking over from Turning Point and also being the new family support worker. And then we're just having regular conversations, also giving her the opportunity to let me know when it was a good time to call. So she didn't feel as if, I was bombarding her with calls and things like that, because she was also getting calls from school. And what I've learned as well, obviously with schools and other professionals calling some of these vulnerable families, it's a lot of calls. So it does get a lot for them. So sometimes we feel as if they're ignoring us. But if we put ourselves in their shoes in regards to calls, sometimes they could be getting about 6 calls a day, and I could just be the 6th one and she just decides, I just don't want to talk to Sharisa today, and it's just making sure that tomorrow, or even when the call doesn't get answered, that you just maybe send a text and just say, okay, I tried to call, I'll give you a call back tomorrow. Because also as well, some of these parents prefer to message, so it was just understanding what mum preferred, and she was happy with both. And then what I did was I arranged a video call and asked her if that was okay. She said that was fine. And then once I did the video call, Danny was quite shy. He's a shy lad. So he was quite shy. But what I did was I just spoke to him because I knew he was in the background. So I just spoke to him, made a few jokes, spoke to mum about what I already knew that he liked, because I'd asked mum what his interests were. So then that was my entry point into when I did gain that connection over a video call, or if it was just on a speaker. Just, young people, they won't speak to people that they don't know. That's what they've been taught anyway. And then all of a sudden we just come on board through a video call and they're supposed to just tell us everything. So it's just finding that balance. So I knew that he liked certain things with his gaming, with Minecraft and things like that. So and I knew about those things, but if I didn't, I just would have Googled a little bit just to see what it was about, and then just use that to then have a conversation. Because if I say to him, oh, how are you doing? He might just shrug his shoulders or just nod his head and tell his mum he doesn't want to speak. But then as soon as I've mentioned Minecraft, he's like, okay, maybe he's thinking, okay, this girl's a bit cool, and things like that, to just calm him down a little bit. So I just did that through the first 2 video calls, just spoke to him through the video call, knowing that he was in the background. He would peek a bit and then I would peek at him as well, and just do little fun things and just show him that, I'm not this scary monster on the screen coming to ask him questions about his family and all of these things. And then in regards to Danny, finally got the call with just him. Mum then went into her room and we was just talking. It just so happened that he was on his gaming chair. So I told him how amazing and how cool his gaming chair was, and if he would recommend it. Then he started to talk about his gaming chair. So then he was then comfortable. And at that point, then I spoke about school and how he feels about the transition in going into secondary school. And because he was already comfortable talking to me, he just told me, he was feeling a bit nervous and things like that. So we just spoke about that. And then I took myself back to my time at secondary school, just to, again, remind him of, okay, I've been there. You're not the only one. This is what happened with me, and some positive things to look forward to with moving to school, that there is positive things going on, and things. We talk about break times, lunch times, and all of these things, which he was happy with. And then that was that so far of where I've got to with Danny. And then after this lockdown is done and we're all able to make contact with families, it's just, I feel like it's an amazing level of where we are at the moment for me to then speak to Danny about actually meeting him and maybe set set some things that we want to talk about or things that we might want to do. You know, if I'm going to be coming to his house, he can show me his gaming chair in person. He can show me the games that he likes, and then again, it just gets him comfortable to be able to speak and gain that trust with me. And then obviously once the lockdown is over, to actually go through with what we've agreed that we're going to do together. And then back with mum, it's just I provided like a safe word for mum, because before we knew that dad was in the property, through the video call, it raised some alarm bells, because mum didn't seem, there was on the second video call, mum didn't seem, you know, her the same as how I've seen her, how she normally presents. So obviously, because it's a video call, I'm not going to ask mum, is dad there, because he's going to hear them say, what does she mean, and things like that. So I just spoke with Cheryl about my concerns and thinking that maybe dad is there, and then waited for an opportunity to speak to mum about what's going on. And this happened through me calling mum, and she was out shopping. Asked who she was with. She just said she was with the younger, her daughter. And I just asked, you know, is dad there? She let me know that he is, but he's working, and, you know, the relationship between Danny and dad and things like that. And then we just spoke about a safe word, and into which mum agreed. So, you know, if I call, mum would say something like, my name's Sharisa, but work know me as Shishi and families know me as Shishi. So it's the safe word will be, oh, hi Shishi, I can't really hear you. Your background's a bit too loud. So straight away, I just knew that she wouldn't be able to talk about, you know, certain information. I could just have a normal call with her and say, oh, okay, I'll call you back tomorrow, you know, and things like that. Also, when having that conversation when dad's not there and she's more open to speak about certain things with receiving help and things like that, I've just asked her, you know, I'll send a message and ask you if this is the right time to talk or things like that, or she can message me, which she has. She will message me, or she will call me if she needs any support with anything. And also I provided my email, because obviously as texts usually pop up on your phone, or, you know, if her phone is being looked through, I feel like the email might be one of the last places that, you know, would be searched. So we've just given her something to say, okay, you can then send me an email if you need, and things like that. So it's just providing that little help where mum feels like, okay, there's other outlets that she can use to get in contact with me if she needs to, but also letting her know that with the safe word that she doesn't always have to speak. So I don't want her to always be, how can I put it, like nervous when she sees my name come up, because then she's thinking, okay, dad's here and I don't know how I'm going to handle this phone call. And then he could pick that up and be wondering, okay, but who is that? And why are you acting this way if she's only the family support worker? Like, what have you been talking about? Because she might not be sharing certain information because maybe in fear of what dad might say, or dad might tell her not to speak with me and things like that. So, you know, that's what we've done so far through videos and since I've been in the lockdown.
And that's great, because I guess we talked about, when we reflected on this, when we first identified the family to talk about, actually, you know, the video call and using things like WhatsApp is what young people are used to. So kind of that might be less scary for Danny to engage with. And actually his behavior has been slightly different to what Cheryl has experienced in terms of that face-to-face asking questions, has been met with you know, behavior, I guess his resilience of swearing and kind of be uncaring, but he's not seemed like that with you. And maybe the barrier of not being in the same room together, and that barrier of using the phone and being a little bit more distant has enabled him to engage a little bit better. And the feedback from other workers using WhatsApp and using remote media to engage with young people in this time has been good. But I think what you reflected on is that making sure that you continue to build the relationship, which is really, really important, and I've seen that people commented on that. So I guess lockdown sometimes mean we're isolated, and that kind of sometimes makes us think we can't build relationship. But what you've shown is that you know, your liaison with Cheryl, as who was the key worker, and understanding what you know, what conversations do I need to have is really important. Your continuous relationship building, ready for when you then lock down, because you've got that relationship and you can start asking some more of those in-depth questions. The only question I have is, obviously, you know that dad's in the property, you have regular contact. Are you able to build a relationship with dad as well as dad of Danny as a member of the household? Are you
Yes.
able to have those conversations?
I haven't had any conversations with dad at the moment. My future goal for dad is to try and have that when I, you know, make a video call with mum and dad is in the room, then just to speak how I did with when Danny was in the room, and just let dad know that, you know, we're not here the same way how I went about it with Danny. I feel like that's how I'd go about it with dad, because obviously dad's got his reasons and maybe his fears in engaging. So just letting him know that it's not about, you know, just because he's just going to be seen as the bad guy and he's always going to have everything negative. It's all about trying to bring all of these things to make a positive for the children and also for their relationship and as a family. So it's just, I'm going to try and bring dad in slowly, if that makes sense. I was just trying to build that relationship with mum and Danny first, and then slowly try and bring dad in and see if he's more understanding in what I'm actually here to support with, you know. And it's not because sometimes I feel, you know, with some of the parents, when they might feel like, even though what he's done is wrong, but to him he's feeling attacked, you know, he can't admit that what he's doing is wrong. So if I'm coming in and saying, okay, so what's happening here, then he's just going to resist. He's not going to engage. But if I can get him the same way how I feel I got Danny to engage, I'll have to go that route, if that makes sense. And then slowly, hopefully, he can then start speaking and just saying things like, okay, me and Danny's been playing the computer games, which I know that they've been having quite a good relationship since the lockdown on the game. They speak over the headsets to each other in different rooms so they can, you know, speak about stuff and, you know, tease each other and play and things like this. So again, that's another avenue to go down, because that's a positive that I can bring dad in on. And once I bring dad in on the positive, then maybe he can relax a little bit and be more open to speak about what he feels like, you know, is happening, and how he feels as if he's trying to make a good change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just seeing that some comments are kind of saying, people, it was 45 minutes. We've gone a little bit over time, but it's really important to hear those stories. And thank you, Sharisa and Cheryl. So
No
I
problem.
think we heard a lot around that relationship building, continuing those conversations. I think domestic abuse is a really complex issue. And I think we've seen snippets on this family that people do want to change, people recognize change is happening. So kind of keeping it at that level 3, it feels right if we go back to the threshold. I think how we engage after lockdown and making sure, because for Danny, he is in a very vulnerable age where transition, lots of change happening, you know, going into puberty. So thinking about that behavior and what he may have experienced during lockdown, and kind of whether there's been tension between mum and dad, or whether there has been incidents of domestic abuse, is something we will have to unpick. And then also picking up with mum again about, you know, where were we before dad moved in, and what the positives were about that, and picking that back up, and keep engaging with dad as a dad, and kind of the impact of his behavior, not only on mum as a victim, but also on the children growing up, and kind of getting that, and then at the right point, again, trying to get dad to engage in the interventions he needs to change that behavior. So that's really important that we continue on that. And thank you, Sharisa and Cheryl, for sharing that. I think there was one question I want to pick up. Somebody's asking about,
you know, what children aggressive behaviour escalates at home, but not at school. So I think it's really important, like Cheryl has explained with her work in Danny and now being picked up by Sharisa, is that we find who's got a trusting relationship with that child and who's best placed to start unpicking where that behaviour coming from, why that behaviour is there, and then what is the best intervention. So without understanding why they're behaving differently at home and at school, then we can't know what the best intervention is. It may be that something triggers it, that the child needs to have some reflection around that behaviour support or some counselling, or, you know, that there's a parenting change that needs to happen, or a number of interventions. So that's why it would be really good to do an assessment to understand where that behaviour coming from and kind of understand what interventions are needed. And I think within that question, there was a question around children wanting to see and contact their dad, but mum has declined to do this. And I guess that comes back to consent and talking through building a relationship and understanding what would be the impact to the child and how, you know, why that child wants to see the dad, and what, you know, what are the consequences on that, and why does mom not want to see the child, and what's that, and kind of working it through with the family and understanding what might be the best best action for that child, and working it through with the family. That's why working with rather than doing to is really important in terms of our approach. So thank you both for sharing that. The next slide just gives an overview of what we've done in early help as we kind of drawing this to a close. So in localities, just to share with people, is that all of our early help family support teams have assessed the risk around each of the children, and then based on that risk, that's kind of driven forward our interventions with the families, and then also our linkage back to Black Country Women's Aid and other agencies to make sure that the families are provided with the right support and the phases. So a really good example was that Cheryl said Black Country Women's Aid has been trying to contact this mum, but she's not engaging at this moment. We will follow that up with a conversation with Black Country Women's Aid to say, please don't take her off the book so we don't have to restart a referral. Can we leave the referral open, because when mum comes out of lockdown, she might want to engage again, so we're not delaying that support by having to wait to fill in another referral. So that communication with agencies is really important. And then, like we said, we're using WhatsApp, video calls, and safe words around that. If you want to get some advice and guidance about families you are working with and you're not sure where to go, then please ring the Early Help Hub. There's lots of family support workers on there that will be happy to talk it through with you at Reflect. So I'm going to hand over to Kellyanne now, who's going to provide just the last bit about what access to training and support you can have through the Safeguarding Board partnership.
Okay, thank you. It's also just to take note, just another resource that we're aware of is that victims of domestic abuse can access Boots pharmacies as well, so they can go and ask for a consultation and then Boots will actually contact specialist domestic abuse services to support that victim. And also, if you are working with victims as well, that it's good to know that in an emergency they can dial 999, they can just kind of cough or not answer any of the questions and then press 55 if it isn't safe to talk, and it will direct them straight through to the police as well. So it's just a couple more things that we know that is out there that are supporting victims of domestic abuse. So with further links to training, we've got on our website, which is www.walsallfp.co.uk. If you can, I don't know whether, Kerry, you can click on the link, whether it will actually access it. If not, you can see a screenshot. Is that it there? Yeah, so just to make you aware of just a few places where you can actually get some further information is on the top the link at the top, we've got COVID-19. So anything that we're doing around safeguarding in reference to COVID-19, you can find there. And if you scroll down, the third link down is around domestic abuse support. So in there, it just gives you some of the information as to where you can access support through Black Country Women's Aid, the helpline, when they're actually open. Some sort of guidance and resources are available on there. So there's lots of different links that if you just click on them directly, they'll take you straight through to kind of National Domestic Violence Helpline and the Men's Advice Line, things like that. To access further training, if you go on to professionals and volunteers and down to the learning and development, the face-to-face training at the moment is obviously all suspended, but what we are looking at doing and working with partners at the moment is around how we can do some of that training virtually. So we're going to be doing some Right Help, Right Time training virtually, and you'll also see on the e-learning, we've got lots of e-learning on there, whether it's partnership learning that we've developed ourselves, or whether it's things that, because lots of free e-learning training at the moment, so anything that we think is relevant that we're posting on there as well. So there's lots of webinars, there's some direct e-learning training, some of it is accredited, some of it isn't. So just kind of have a look on there, and we are also continuing to develop some of our podcasts as well, which is another section. So we launched yesterday the child exploitation podcast as well. So just keep having a look, because we're always updating that at the website around training and development. So please just kind of keep your eyes open, keep checking back in kind of once a week, and I'm sure you'll find some information that you need on there. If we do any more of the practice reflection workshops around adults or children, we will be kind of sending them out throughout our partnership as well, but we will also be advertising them on the website. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. I think it's been really... Sorry,
can I just bring in one more before you finish? So we will be sending out an evaluation. I've already seen one comment in the question that talks about how do practitioners keep themselves safe in this current climate. So if you've got any ideas of issues and subjects that we need to explore further and have a conversation with and bring in some experts, then please put that in your evaluation. So we'll be sending the link together with the PowerPoint of today, so people have access to that. Please tell us how you found it, what we can improve, and what other subjects we could cover, because we're looking to look these regular. So probably staff health and well-being in light of this way of working is probably one subject we'll be picking up from today. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I was going to talk about evaluation. So we will be sending that out, and it is paramount that you get it back to us, because these are for you. So we don't want to be going down the wrong route. So please sort of tell us anything that you want to see in the future. So thank you for attending, and we hope to see you at our next practice reflection workshop.